Welcome to History What If, where we question the events that already happened. What really could have happened? Could we have changed the outcome? Before we begin, everything you're about to hear is based on historical research, facts, and records. The what-if scenarios are my own opinion and interpretation of events, designed to make you think, question, and explore history differently. This is not the official historical record. This is history, through a different lens. In 1912, human beings did something they had never done before. They built the largest moving object ever constructed. A ship so enormous, so magnificent, so breathtakingly over the top that people genuinely struggled to believe it was real. The RMS Titanic, 269 meters long. That is almost 3 football fields laid end to end. She weighed 46,000 tons. She burned 825 tons of coal every single day just to keep moving. She had 10,000 light bulbs, which in 1912 was basically the entire world's supply of light bulbs. She had a swimming pool, a squash court, a Turkish bath, a gymnasium, a darkroom for photography, and her own newspaper printed fresh every single morning. She cost $7.5 million to build. In today's money, that's somewhere in the region of $200 million, give or take. The accountants would like you to know they are still not over it. And according to the people who built her, the people who had, again, absolutely no financial or reputational reason to oversell her, she was completely, totally, 100% unsinkable. It sank. Let's set the scene. April 10th, 1912, Southampton, England. The Titanic sets off on her maiden voyage, her very first journey, bound for New York City. On board, 2,223 people, passengers and crew from all walks of life. First-class passengers who had paid the equivalent of $100,000 for their ticket. Third-class passengers who had scraped together every penny they owned for a chance at a new life in America. 13 honeymooning couples, a dog show planned for Monday. 12 dogs in total, most of them in first class because of course they were. At 11:40 p.m., lookout Frederick Fleet spotted something dead ahead. Something dark. Something large. Something getting bigger very fast. He rang the warning bell 3 times and grabbed the phone to the bridge. His message was simple. 4 words. Iceberg, right ahead. The officer of the watch immediately ordered the wheel hard over and the engines reversed. The ship began to turn. It almost made it. At 11:40 p.m. and 37 seconds, the Titanic struck the iceberg along its starboard side. Not a head-on collision. A long, scraping blow that opened up the hull across 5 of the ship's watertight compartments. The Titanic could survive 4 flooded compartments. 5 was one too many. She had approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes left to exist. Before we get into what could have been different, let's just sit with the numbers for a moment. Because the numbers are important, and the numbers are devastating. 2,223 people were on board the Titanic when she struck the iceberg. Of those, 1,517 died. That's 68.4% of everyone on the ship. Only 710 people survived, 31.6%. But here is the number that changes everything. The number that takes this from a tragedy to something else entirely. The lifeboats that were on the Titanic that night had enough space for 1,178 people. That means even with the lifeboats they had, 53.4% of everyone on board could have survived. More than half, if only the boats had been filled. They weren't. And that is the question we are here to answer today. Not just why they weren't filled, but how many other decisions, how many other moments, how many other things could have been done differently that night. Let's go through them, one by one. Let's start with the most infuriating problem. The Titanic was designed with capacity for up to 64 lifeboats. 64. Enough to get every single person off the ship, all 2,223 of them with room to spare for their luggage, their dogs, and their mild sense of panic. They brought 20. You might be wondering why. Why on earth would you build a ship capable of carrying 64 lifeboats and then only bring 20? Well, sit down for this one, because the reason is genuinely astonishing. Reason number 1, the law didn't require more. The British maritime regulations at the time, which had last been updated in 1894, almost 2 decades earlier, required ships over 10,000 tons to carry a minimum of 16 lifeboats. The Titanic was 46,000 tons. The law still said 16 because nobody had updated the law, because nobody had thought it necessary to update the law, because nothing had gone wrong yet. Reason number 2, and this is the one that should make you put your head through a wall. The White Star Line decided that more lifeboats would make the deck look cluttered, and a cluttered deck, you see, would upset first-class passengers on their morning promenade. But the lifeboat story gets worse, because even with only 20 lifeboats on board, even with only 1,178 spaces available for 2,223 people, they still didn't fill the boats they had. The very first lifeboat launched that night was Lifeboat 7. It had a capacity of 65 people. It left with 28 people in a boat designed for 65, 37 empty seats with velvet cushions, rowing away from a sinking ship. Across all 20 lifeboats, historians estimate that somewhere between 400 and 500 additional people could have been saved if the boats had simply been filled to capacity. 400 to 500 people who were right there, who had a seat waiting for them, who watched the boats row away. Now, let's talk about the iceberg itself, because the iceberg didn't come out of nowhere. In fact, the Titanic knew about it, or should have. On April 14th, the day of the collision, the Titanic received 6 separate iceberg warnings from other ships operating in the same waters. 6 ships calling in to say, "Icebergs, watch out." The first warning came at 9 in the morning, the second at 1:42 in the afternoon, the third at 1:45, the fourth at 7:30 in the evening, the fifth sent by the SS Mesaba at 9:40 p.m. and covering the exact stretch of ocean the Titanic was sailing straight into, never even reached the bridge. The Titanic's radio operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, were overwhelmed with personal telegrams from first-class passengers, messages about stock portfolios, messages to relatives, messages asking whether the dining room was open late. The Mesaba's iceberg warning arrived, was noted, was set aside, and was never passed on. One warning did reach Captain Smith directly. The Baltics message, handed to him at lunch. He read it. He showed it to J. Bruce Ismay, the managing director of White Star Line, who was on board the ship, who was very keen on arriving in New York ahead of schedule. Ismay pocketed the warning for several hours. When Smith eventually put it in his own pocket, it was to go to dinner. The ship was traveling at 22.5 knots, close to full speed, through waters that 6 different ships had told them were full of ice. Scientists and maritime historians have studied this extensively. The conclusion is consistent. At reduced speed, the lookout would have had more time. At 21 knots, just 1.5 knots slower than their actual speed, the Titanic would have missed the iceberg by a margin of approximately 15 meters, 1.5 knots, the width of a small room, between 1,517 deaths and everyone going home. I want to take a moment with this one, because this is the part of the story that more than any other illustrates just how close everything was to being different. The lookouts in the crow's nest that night, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, had no binoculars, on a ship, in the dark, in known iceberg territory. They were doing their best with nothing but their eyes and the cold night air and whatever they could squint out of the blackness ahead. Here is the thing. There were binoculars on the ship. They had been used on the first leg of the journey, from Belfast to Southampton. But in Southampton, a last-minute decision was made to replace Second Officer David Blair with a more senior officer. Blair was taken off the ship, and when he left, without realizing it, with no particular drama, he walked off the Titanic with the key to the binocular storage locker in his coat pocket. Here is the thing. There were binoculars on the ship. They had been used on the first leg of the journey, from Belfast to Southampton. But in Southampton, a last-minute decision was made to replace Second Officer David Blair with a more senior officer. Blair was taken off the ship, and when he left, without realizing it, with no particular drama, he walked off the Titanic with the key to the binocular storage locker in his coat pocket. While the Titanic was sinking, another ship was sitting completely stationary roughly 20 miles away. The SS Californian had stopped for the night because ice was blocking her path. A sensible decision, a cautious decision, the kind of decision that would have served everyone well, if only the Californian's wireless operator had stayed awake. At 11:30 p.m., exactly 10 minutes before the Titanic hit the iceberg, the Californian's wireless operator, Cyril Evans, switched off his radio and went to bed. He'd been working since early that morning. He was tired. It was late. And those are all completely understandable reasons. He had no way to know that in 10 minutes, the ship he'd been trying to warn earlier that evening was about to need him more than anyone had ever needed a wireless operator in the history of the world. After the collision, the Titanic fired distress rockets. 8 of them. Brilliant white explosions against the black sky, visible for miles. The crew of the Californian saw every one of them. They woke Captain Stanley Lord. They told him a ship was firing rockets. He looked at the rockets through his porthole. He considered the situation. And then he went back to sleep. He pulled the covers up. Another rocket went off. He pulled them higher. Another. He put a pillow over his head. Another. He didn't move. He would not be moving. Captain Stanley Lord, commander of a ship 20 miles from 1,500 people freezing in the North Atlantic, went back to sleep. The Californian finally received word of the disaster at 5:30 a.m. when her radio operator woke up, switched his set back on, and discovered what had happened. By then, the Titanic had been on the bottom of the ocean for over 3 hours. The Carpathia, 58 miles away, nearly 3 times the distance, had already arrived and rescued the survivors. She'd received the distress call, woken her captain, pushed her engines to speeds beyond anything she'd ever attempted, plowed through ice fields in total darkness, and arrived at 4:10 a.m. 58 miles. Through ice, in the dark, in time. 20 miles. Stationary. Asleep. Not in time. So, let's say 3 things go differently. 64 lifeboats, all of them filled, binoculars in the crow's nest, iceberg spotted earlier, Californian's radio stays on. She responds immediately. Same ship, same iceberg, same night, same ocean. But this time, the lifeboats lower with people in them. All of them. All 64. The Californian arrives with her lights blazing. The last boat rows clear. The Titanic sinks alone in the dark, but the people, the 2,223 people who got on board that morning, most of them make it home. Instead, 1,517 people died, and 53.4% of them could have fitted on the lifeboats that were already there. The boats were just never filled. 710 people were rescued by the Carpathia that morning. In the hours and days that followed, inquiries were launched on both sides of the Atlantic. The British Board of Trade, the very organization responsible for the outdated 1894 lifeboat law, was asked to investigate itself. This was, as you can imagine, not their favorite assignment. But the consequences were real and they were swift. Within 2 years of the disaster, the rules of ocean travel had been transformed. Ships had to carry enough lifeboats for every person on board. No exceptions. Wireless radio operators had to maintain a 24-hour watch. No exceptions. The International Ice Patrol was created, a dedicated operation to monitor and report icebergs in the North Atlantic shipping lanes. It was established in 1914, and it still operates today. Every change was possible before 1912. Every single one. The knowledge was there. The technology was there. It just took the deaths of 1,517 people for anyone to make it happen. The wreck of the Titanic was discovered in 1985 by explorer Robert Ballard, 73 years after she sank. She lies 12,600 feet below the surface of the North Atlantic, her bow buried 18 meters into the seabed from the force of the impact. Around 6,000 artifacts have been recovered from the site over the years. Shoes, letters, glasses, a child's toy, a leather purse with coins still inside. Small, quiet things that were once part of ordinary lives on an extraordinary, ill-fated ship. Could the Titanic have saved more lives? Yes, hundreds more. Possibly most of them. 20 lifeboats instead of 64. Empty seats rowing away in the dark. 6 warnings, all ignored. A key in a pocket in Southampton. A ship 20 miles away, asleep. None of it was inevitable. All of it was preventable. The ocean didn't care. The iceberg didn't care. It was the decisions of people. Ordinary, fallible, sometimes deeply foolish people that decided who lived and who didn't that night. And that, more than anything else, is why we're still talking about it. If this video made you think, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment. What do you think could have been different? This is History What If, and I'll see you in the next one.